Welcome, everyone. We are back again with our series called Seriously. We're on video number 13, believe it or not. And today we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount through the eyes of Skye Jethani in his book, What If Jesus Was Serious? Today we're looking at chapters 58 and 59. And I guess to sum it up, we're saying that character matters more than accomplishments. And this is considering again what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. It's found in Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 to 20, where Jesus talks about recognizing a tree by its fruit and a person by their actions. And that's the idea we kind of started in last video, but we want to explore a little further today.
Yeah, so I think it's just the idea is it's really easy to see what a person does. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about fruit here, we've got to make sure we've got probably clarify what we mean by that.
Exactly.
This is where I think the trip up happens. Mm-hmm. This is where I think even Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, basically, we'll get to that in a later video. Basically, there's some trip up things, but we can have the appearance of good, but it really is success.
Is success. So yeah, that doesn't look at what motivates a person to do what they do. I mean, they could be trying to get praise from other people, or even get attention for themselves, or they're doing it for personal gain. Or sometimes people even have evil intentions. They do good things to get influence so they can take advantage of people, particularly people that are in authority, abusing the people that put their trust in them.
Yeah, and it's really, again, too easy to move to the assumption of godliness because of, again, some sort of success that's being done there, something that looks really good, something that looks the part, but it really is lacking in the fruit that Jesus is really getting at.
Mm-hmm. So, again, we need to really kind of clarify what that fruit is, because we often get confused. And Skye in the book says that most of the time we're even culturally conditioned to assess people by their professional success. And I don't think it was any different in Jesus' time. Jesus declared how hard it was for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven, and they were seen as successful people in that culture. And his disciples were kind of like shocked and astonished. And they said, well, who can get in then? And Jesus says, well, no one can without God's help. But they had assumed that success and wealth and influence was a sign of God's blessing. And I think sometimes we may not say that out loud, but we certainly sometimes think that.
Well, absolutely. It's something that's easy to see. So that's quite often, I think, the first thing we easy to see it, we go right to it. I think, if we can talk about it in the case of pastors
or even churches,
in churches, it really can look at the idea of the amount of people attending, the amount of money they can raise, the amount of programs. And again, we want to sit there and say successful programs even.
Yep.
Not just that you have lots, but they're seemingly doing a lot.
And really, none of those things are bad things. I mean, we're not here to bash churches that have those things, or churches that are larger and get lots of attention. I think it's, again, getting back to what Jesus was looking for. And again, we assume that if the pastor or leader is successful by cultural standards, that they must be a godly leader.
That's right. And I think it's really easy to see that, because it's really things that, if we're honest, when we do see some of that stuff, it's something we can admire. Like, oh, wow. Like, look what they did. And really miss but look the who of that character behind there.
Mm-hmm. And yet, many times we read the news, and time again, we hear of many, many successful leaders and pastors that are in the news for all the wrong reasons. There's affairs, embezzlement, slander, abusing their authority. And it just seems that that's what's more about those people in positions of authority, particularly in Christian circles, that are in the news for these days, rather than for the good things.
That's right. And I think that's where we make that mistake of elevating talent.
Yep.
And I think, mistaking talent somehow means there's a good character behind that. Or even the fact that good talent means that they are particularly godly. Now, we'll say that talent absolutely could be a gifting from God, because I think talents are, but that doesn't necessarily mean there's a good character
behind that. Yeah.
Behind that.
So let's just come right out and say then that when Jesus talks about fruit, he's talking way more than just accomplishments. He's actually talking about a person's character.
That's right.
So the Apostle Paul, who was a early first century Pharisee who started off as a persecutor of followers of Jesus and then turned into one of the greatest promoters of the Christian faith of his time, he wrote a letter to the church in Galatia, and he said this in Galatians 5:22 and 23, that but the Holy Spirit produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And I think this kind of confirms that the fruit we're talking about is a person's character, because all of these attributes are or describe a person's sort of inner character.
That's right. And it's going back to the idea that this, we talk about want to affect the world around us.
Yep.
And again, we can look at how a talent can affect the world around us, which it can. But what Jesus wants is when we affect the world around us with a fruit, it's a character, but then it's a character that actually positively impacts people, whether it's love and joy and peace and patience and all that. And people should experience those things. And if you happen to have talent, great.
It's a bonus. Yeah. And I think that's, if we get the sort of the source and the motivation right. So, it should be that those inner qualities are affecting how we act, as opposed to some other motivation that causes us to act that way.
That's right.
So the outcome might look the same on the outside, but it can be very different from the inner. If you were to take a look at the inside of a person, what really is causing them to act in that way. And I know there's Jesus, where I just want to make this other point here, but Skye makes in the book. He said it also means that healthy trees with godly fruit, meaning people and pastors and leaders that are, they may not achieve the measurable success that others have or get noticed for, but it doesn't mean that they're not healthy. That's right. So, and again, I think when it comes to leadership, how do we actually tell? Well, we're actually going to cover that in the next video, and that's going to be coming out later this week. So I think what I'd like to kind of move to before we get there is that how does this fruit produced in us? How do we acquire the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and self-control.
Well, I think it starts, with the idea of transformation.
Yep.
We need to really look at this, is that this isn't, first, this isn't the just will yourself to have these fruits, because fruit is a product of the tree, and really we need to see ourselves, and we need to see, the function of the church is the idea of leading people into this transformation.
Sure.
Not throughout the church to transform.
Yeah.
They are leading people to Jesus who does that work.
Exactly. Only Jesus can do that in our lives through the power of the Holy Spirit. And I sincerely believe that, we that following Jesus will eventually make us better people that are more like him.
That's right.
That will have the fruit of the Spirit. I sincerely believe that's true.
I do too.
And like you said, where we get off track sometimes is how this transformation happens. We believe, and I'm guilty as anybody for this, because this is kind of how I was taught as a younger person. And I still think many people think this way today. And I've thought this way for a very long time as well, is that we can change for the better if we have a combination of the right knowledge, meaning that we believe the right things and we have good theology and willpower.
Yeah. Well, and we do that. If it's just the right thing, willpower, it's that's
so
it.
The kind of way
That's
that kind
the
of
formula.
translates into what we promote in churches is if you just read the right book, including the Bible, or you get into the right programs, a new believers class, or you get your kids into children's ministry, or we follow the right system, take the 40 days of purpose, or you get into a small group that review the sermon notes, and then I'll become the person I want to be. And again, I'm not knocking these things. They're not bad things. In fact, I've participated in all of these things,
Yeah.
and I still participate in some of those things. And we hear wonderful stories of transformation sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's like putting it in the right place or the priority. Is that all of these things can be
Yeah.
a great tool in the journey of transformation.
Yep.
But they them by themselves will never
cause
it.
Yeah. And it's just curious to me that it seems to work for some people some of the time, but not everybody all the time. And again, there's a whole industry in churches and even other industries where we continually create new programs and curriculum for people to follow. That's the latest and greatest thing that will help compensate for the thing that we thought was the latest and greatest before that doesn't seem to work anymore. And I think in Jesus was very intentional here when he uses the metaphor of trees here in the Sermon on the Mount. And later on in John 15, he talks about a grapevine. In both cases, he's talking about the fruit that is produced is based on the identity of the tree. So if it's an apple tree, it's not going to produce oranges. And if it's a grapevine, it's going to produce grapes and not blackberries or watermelon. And so Skye in the book sums it up this way: no amount of knowledge or willpower will affect the change of what the tree produces. It is inherent to the tree's identity. Fruit just happens based on what kind of tree it is. Now, to me, I find this a little perplexing or maybe even discouraging when it comes to actual transformation, when we don't see fruit or we don't see change happening.
Yeah, I think that is where we move into what I'm going to say the manufacturing kind of thing that whereas I don't see it happening right away.
So I must not be following the steps.
Must not be doing it right. Something wrong with me, whatever that might be. There's so many lies that can sit in there, and we miss out on the important thing of letting God do the growth and trust that there's something happening that's just in the unseen moment.
Mm-hmm. And I think our culture is partially to blame for that too, because we have a very much of a self-improvement culture that's always looking for five easy steps for things like patience or or anything. Actually, you look on YouTube or you look in any news articles, and there's always somebody that's discovered a process or a formula to get whatever. And I don't think that's quite what Jesus was talking about here. He's talking about when we become followers of Jesus, he actually gives us a new identity, one that is based on the kingdom of heaven and that's connected to him, that's Jesus. And then it's the Holy Spirit that causes us to thrive and produce the good fruit. And I know we've talked about this a lot, but it's still just a little bit vague for me.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's really great as that we sort of bring in some other understanding of how growth happens, and they're doing such great work in this area of brain science for that. And we were learning that in the book that we've just been going through called The Other Half of Church.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
It's so good. And it's looking at these issues and it's realizing, one, definitely our churches generally have been this way, but even much of the world tends to be this way, especially in the westernized world. It's the idea that it's information that will bring about transformation. And it's sort of like that information alone does not do that.
Yep.
And that's what we're learning in this, and because it's a left side of the brain thing. And those things like the relational, emotional, the character is actually, and again, they're scanning our brains to see that is actually activated on the right side.
And it's both working together that actually cause the change.
That's right. So we need that right side to catch up to that left side. And we got to bring that left side back. Not to, we don't do it. It's more like the idea of until we don't overemphasize the intellectual. There's an important place for it. But
and I think we've only
emphasized
that. So I really like how they addressed this in the book. That they use a really good example that I really liked. They actually quote John 14:23, where Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says, all who love me will obey my teachings. And then in the book, they say that our love for Jesus, which is a right brain attachment function, is what produces obedience. A left brain only view of Jesus' teachings would conclude that we need to choose to obey, and this will prove that we love him. And then they say this is exactly backwards. If we want to obey Jesus, then we need to focus on the right brain skills that help me love him and receive his love back.
Yeah. And it's really kind of interesting because I know I fall into this trap, and I too often and definitely done that. Obey. We hear that we think it's obey these whatever this list of
There's a list of rules.
list of rules, and we miss out, especially when we're looking at the entirety of the story of God. Is that yes, we're not going to sit there and say there were some rules in place. Go to the Old Testament. There's a lot of rules in place.
There's a lot of rules.
We talk about 10 commandments. There are rules.
Yeah.
Jesus even talked about 2 commandments. Kind of got some rules there.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those are always in the area of relationship, and relational attachment. And it's very much like, like the idea of even a family. You might have some rules, but the rules are come after, hey, we're a family, and bedtime is. There's it's, and I think that's the thing we got to look at first. It starts with, founded in, the most important part is this relational attachment.
Yeah, which really is love.
Yeah.
So they kind of sum it up in the book by saying then my behavior or our behavior will take care of itself. Our brains are designed to change through love. So to me, I think this is extremely important. We must learn to love Jesus first, and then following his teachings will come out of our changed identity from being with him.
That's right.
And again, like you said, this is based on relatively new neuroscience.
Yeah.
Like in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot of study in this area. Like you say, they now have the ability to actually scan our brains while we're being asked questions and doing activities where they couldn't do that in the same way before. Yeah. And so it just makes me appreciate Jesus so much and how brilliant his teachings are, because they are based on relational, and his core teaching is obviously love, because really it's the only thing that can make a difference.
That's true. Well, with that, it's really one of the things that we want to leave you with is that Jesus does want to show you his love. Mm-hmm. He wants to be in relationship with you. He wants to know you and be known by you. And so if that's something that you've never attached to before, you've never really thought of before, or just need to readdress, because sometimes we need to do that. I just encourage you to take some time and just connect with Jesus about that, and feel free to, throw us on a comment in this video, or email us through, and we'd love to have a further conversation if that's where you'd like to be. If there's something in this that has just stirred up thoughts, have a conversation with a friend, have a conversation in your missional community, whatever that is. There'll be some questions to have to, again, stimulate further conversation around this. And we thank you for joining us, and please like and subscribe. We'll talk to you next video.